I'm going to show you how to make a 3D beveled frame, put a photograph inside that frame, and then put that framed photo inside a room. So we're going to do this from scratch. So open up Photoshop. Let's open up a file. File, open. Go to the Photo Spin Images folder inside the Working Files folder, and let's open up the tropical beach scene there. I want to give it some space around the outside there for the frame. So I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size. We'll make it larger, relatively speaking. So I've got the relative checkbox there. We'll make it, let's say, 3 inches larger for this particular image. That'll work here, I think. There's a nice white area there for us to cover that up with a frame. All right, let's extrude this. So I go to the 3D panel, click on 3D extrusion, and click on Create. This is going to create a very thick thing. We don't need to have it be so thick. So let's knock this down to something like 20, let's say. Change the name over here by double-clicking on it. We can change it to Photo. But what it doesn't do is that it doesn't change it up here. So you got to kind of do it twice if you want to keep track of these things. Don't have to do that, but it's helpful. All right, now I want to create the frame, so I'm going to make a new layer for that. So I'll go over here, new layer like that. I'm going to fill that with white, so I go Edit, Fill. And we'll fill it with the background color there, which is white. Click OK. And now I'm going to extrude that as well. So I've got that layer selected, 3D extrusion, Create. It too will be way too thick. Click on that. Let's bring this thing down to something like 50 or so, because that's a reasonable thickness for a frame. Change the name of it too. Double click there. We'll call this frame. And I'll go down here and do the same thing. All right, now I want to carve a hole inside the frame before we merge these guys. So I need to get a general size for how large that hole should be. So I'm going to turn it off for a second here and go down to the photo. I want to select an area of the photo that I'm going to carve out of the frame. I'm going to do an internal constraint. So I use the marquee selection tool over here. Click on that. I'm going to be a little bit inside here so I can make the frame a little bit thicker than the image. So right about there is fine. Right down to about there, I think. That'll be the selection that we'll use on the other layer. Go to that other layer now, click on it, make it active, turn it on. I'm going to create an internal constraint here. So I've got that layer selected. I go to 3D, add constraints from the current selection. There we go. And you see we added a constraint down there. I can turn off the selection controller, Command D. I want to click on this. And instead of being active, I want to make it a hole. And there's our photograph. Now I want to merge these two guys together. So I've got this top one selected, and we're going to merge down. So I'm going to go over here and merge down. Takes care of those two guys and puts them together in one. And it names the layer by default photo because that was the bottom layer. Now we've got the photo layer and the frame layer there, which is good. I want to bevel the frame layer. So I'm going to go over here and select the frame layer. Go over here like that. And I'm going to go to Cap. I'm going to bevel the front. Don't need to bevel the back here. Let's just start by expanding the width and see what happens. There we go. That looks pretty good. As we pull it in, though, we see that we're seeing the image behind it. That's one little issue as you bring the bevel in, because it brings it in both from inside and outside. So we're beginning to see just the edges of the image there. But we'll see if we can fix that in just a moment. I want to give the bevel a little bit more of a contour, so I'm going to go over here and change the contour to, let's say, that one there. That looks a little bit more interesting. Let's change the width again and see what effect that has there. Yeah, I kind of like it right about there. Okay. Now I want to give the front inflation, that material there, a color right there on top. So I click over here, and I see that it has a texture file. So I'm going to delete that because I can't just put a color in here with the texture file there. I'd have to go color the texture file. It's easier to work on this color swatch. So I click on that and just remove the texture. So now I'm going to give a color. So I'm going to give it something like, well, blue. Let's just say it's kind of what the scene's like, right? Yeah, it looks pretty good. I like that. We'll take that blue. I think it could be just a little bit thicker, so I'm going to go back over here and adjust that just a bit. You can always adjust it later, so I'm thinking maybe like that. There we go. By reducing the width, I'm reducing the width of the bevel by making this top part wider again. So it's kind of reverse thinking. The width is smaller, but it makes this top part wider. All right, let's go down and work on the front bevel. That too has a texture file. I'll click on that, delete that, remove it. Let's affect the color of that. Right now it's gray because that's the default color. Let's change it to something like, I don't know, gold or something along those lines. That looks pretty good. Okay. And so now we have a photograph inside a frame. Now we can see the edges of the photograph there. We might want to pull it in just a little bit. So I can click on the photo layer, go down here and click on that, and we'll get the selection tool active. We could then, let's say, scale that in just a little bit. I'm not totally satisfied with that, so I want to make the frame a little bit bigger. And we're going to click on the frame layer. Let's scale that one up just a bit. Uniformly scale it up just to cover that up a little bit. There we go. And I think we can scale up the image now to compensate for that little change there to get rid of the little white edge there. Now I think we're doing pretty well. A couple of adjustments there and we're on our way. Now I want to place this in a scene. So I'm going to bring another photograph into this project. I'm going to go File, Place, track down this room here. It's not very elegant, but it'll serve our purposes. Double click on that. It's going to be the wrong proportions for our purposes, but we'll just make it larger by dragging it down here, holding down the Shift and the Alt or the Option keys, and just kind of keeping it centered and making it proportionate like that. All right, we'll accept that. Now we need to put the photo above that. We're going to place this inside that room. So let's just make it a little bit smaller so we can see the room. So to make it smaller, I need to select both elements, both meshes, the photo layer like that, and Control Command click the other one. And now we're going to make it smaller, so we can just go over here and scale it uniformly down a little bit like that, so we can see the room back there. Now I need to get the ground plane to more or less match the ground plane of the room. So let me just kind of close this thing down like that, so I get a better look at it. Take this little tool here and click away from the photograph, and we'll bring the ground plane down a bit like so. I'm having a hard time seeing the ground plane, so I'm going to turn off the visibility of the photograph in the frame. So I go back over here. See the eyeball? You can turn them off individually like that. So temporarily I'm going to turn them off while I work on this ground plane. It's kind of tough to get the ground plane exactly right, so I'm going to kind of eyeball it here the best I can. I need to rotate this such that this back part over here drops down a little bit. That should make the angle work better. So I take the rotation tool here, work in the front, and kind of lift up the front, which drops the back, like so. I can kind of slide around a little bit like that. It's a little tricky. It's kind of hit or miss to a certain degree, but I think that actually worked pretty well. I got these guys more or less parallel with the lines on the floor there. It could be maybe pulled down a little bit more, but I'm happy with that for our purposes here. Let's go back to the 3D panel and turn our photo and our frame back on again. And I want to position this now in the room, so I'm going to select both of them like so. Control or Command click on the second one. Let's just move that guy around. I'll take this tool here and push it back a little bit. Maybe rotate it a bit. And we want to drop it down to the floor. So I go to 3D and Snap Object to Ground Plane. Now when it does this, it finds the first place that hits the floor. So you might be tilting away from the floor a little bit like that. Let's see if we can pull it down a little bit like this. There we go. Maybe slide it down just a touch. And we can always rotate it like this as well. Maybe pull it this way so we can see the shadow. Click on the infinite lights. Let's change the direction a bit so we can drop the shadow behind it like so. If I go too far, it's going to go on the wall and it won't really move up the wall because it's a flat background there. It's not really a 3D area there. I'm going to show you how to make a shadow catcher to do this in the case of something like this, but we'll just drop it down so we don't have that little issue to deal with. If we want to maybe change the lighting or something like that, we could do that as well, but I think this guy looks pretty good. You might want to click on the infinite light there and take a look at its properties and maybe make it not quite so bright, something like that. We might want to look at the image-based light over here, perhaps just drop that off entirely. So there you go. That's how you create a beveled frame, put an object inside that frame, and then place that framed photo inside a room.